In this video, you're going to learn how to create an Angular grid from scratch using the Angular CLI and the Ignite UI schematics for adding templates to an application. Let's get started. I am here with Visual Studio Code open, and I have the Ignite UI website open as well because I want to show you where to find help on everything that you're going to learn today. So the first thing that I want to do is make sure that I have the Ignite UI Angular schematics installed. So the way you would do that is up on NPM, we have these schematics that you can install. So I would do an NPM install globally Ignite UI Angular schematics. Once I do this, I have all of the schematics available to me so I can use them in applications that are built with the Ignite UI CLI or with the Angular CLI. So there we go, everything's installed. The next thing I want to do is make sure that the Angular CLI is installed. So if you don't have the Angular CLI installed, that's real easy to do as well. NPM install -G for global Angular CLI. And then after these are installed, in fact, let me make this a little bit bigger, I'm going to create a new Angular application. So that's really easy to do. You just do ng new, and then we'll do sample app 1. So now this is going to create a brand new Angular application. Would I like to use Angular routing? Yes. I'll leave everything as the defaults, and it goes ahead and it basically creates this app. So let's wait for this to finish. And actually, while that's finishing, let me go to the Infragistics website, go to Design and Development. I'm going to go to Angular. And we have our home page here, but I just want to get right to the Angular sample. So I'm going to scroll down, click, go to the grid samples, and let me make this a little bit wider so we can see this here. And you'll notice the first help topic is Angular schematics and the Ignite UI CLI. So we're not going to use the Ignite UI CLI here. We're actually going to just use the Angular schematics that we have for Ignite UI. There's a few ways to get started with the grid. But you can see here, we did this step 1, which you saw. We didn't create a new collection. We don't need that. We didn't go ahead and add this collection to the Angular app that we just created. We didn't do that, but we are going to do ng add Ignite UI for Angular. So I'm going to copy that in, and let's go to the sample app 1 folder. And actually, let's go ahead and open this up in Visual Studio Code. So we have this guy here. This will be the application that we're going to use. Let me move this down here, resize it a little bit here so it's side by side, and let's do a new terminal window. So here's our new terminal window. I'm using my command prompt here for my terminal, and I'm in sample app 1. So let's go ahead and copy ng add Ignite UI Angular. So what this is doing is it is adding Ignite UI to this Angular application. And yes, I would like to proceed. It's going to install the Angular components from NPM for Ignite UI. Now, if we scroll down in this help topic, there's a lot of information about different types of templates that you can use. What we've done is we've created, with our schematics, all of these templates that you can use to add to your application very quickly. And all you're doing is doing the ng Ignite UI Angular schematics, and then you're telling it what template you want to add. So we've made it really easy for you to add any component that you want to an application with a single command. You could do all this manually, but when you do it manually, it's like you're hunting and pecking on where things have to go. So it is just a lot of extra work that you really don't need to do. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a schematic for a data grid, and it's going to be called new grid. So let's copy this, and I'm going to paste this in. And now this is actually adding that new grid for me. Everything was done. If I go to my source file here, I go to app, here's new grid. The default template has some sample data with it. Here is the HTML definition. So you can see here, here's the IGX grid that was added. It's looking at this local data, which is right here. And that's really all I need to do. So I'm going to make sure everything is saved, and it is. And I'm just going to say ng serve, and let's open this guy up. So this is compiling the application, creating the bundles, and we're going to be able to see this, it'll open up automatically because we did the -O. And then we're going to go ahead and make some modifications to it. So you can see here is the default template for an Angular application. If I go to index.html, you can see that we're pointing to app root. And then if I go to app component.html, here's all the stuff that's in that template. Now I'm going to do a / new grid. And you can see that if I scroll down, here is our data grid. And it has all of this good stuff in it. So it's really not doing anything yet, but it is a data grid. It has paging, which is a nice feature, and it has columns and rows. But we want to make this a little bit more useful. So what I'm going to do is, first off, I'm going to delete all of this stuff in index.html because we really don't need it. So let's just go ahead and we'll get rid of that. We save this, we rerun it. Now the grid is the only thing on the page. Let's go to our local data. What I did here is this data is actually, I don't know, 20 or 30 rows of JSON data coming in. I created some real data that would more closely represent what would come in from, let's say, a web service. So in the next video, we're going to show you how to use or create a web service where this data comes right in. But I'm going to copy this data because there's a lot more rows. I think there's 500 rows or something like that. And I am going to replace all of this with my real data. Paste that in. So now all that is good. But you'll notice I've got some red stuff here because I have a string coming in as a date. So we have to go all the way back up to the top here, and you'll see register date is coming in as a string. And you're going to see how we deal with that a little bit later. An employee ID as well, that should be a number. So now everything is great, no red. Let's do Control S, and we will see how this looks. But you'll notice that I have an error here with register date. The reason is I need to convert this from a string into a date so the grid knows what to do with that. So in order to do that, let's go to the component.ts, and you can see that we actually have a column formatter here, but I want to go ahead and update that. So let me right click over here in my cheat sheet, and I'm just going to paste this in. And what we're doing here is we're not just trying to convert this local date string to a date, because you really can't do that. You actually have to tell it to take the date and convert it into a date, and then you can format it any way you want. If you do get this error message here, just click Quick Fix, and you'll find that the format date is in the Angular Common library, and that's it. Let's hit save, and then we'll see here that our data showed up in our grid. So now we've got a proper date, and this will become important in a little bit. So now that we have the grid set up here, let's go to the HTML of the grid. And I'm going to do a couple things here, just set this guy like this. So let's change the width of this to 100%, and let's change the height to be like 650, and we'll save it. You can see we've got a couple settings here. We got local data, auto-generate columns equals true, and then on column init, I want a few things to happen. In this case, we have an event on column init. You just saw what happened on column init. On column init, we formatted the date. And this is where you could do other formatting, like I want $signs on dollar values or whatever you want. Anything that should happen on the column level, you can just do on column init. And you look for the column field, which is the name of the column, and then it will apply whatever you're doing to that field. So let's go back to our HTML. Now there's two things to set up now. There's features of the grid itself on a global level, and then there's features on the columns. So you'll see here we've got auto generate to true. If I change auto generate to false, you will see save the grid, and now I have no columns or data in the grid because I want to set up all of the columns myself. And the way that you set up columns is with the IGX column object. So if I do an IGX column like so, I can go ahead and start adding properties to the column so you can then customize the behavior of every single column. The column object has probably about 20, 25 different properties that you can set, and then the grid also has properties you can set. To start, let's go ahead and add some columns and some column properties, and I'm just going to copy them real quick for every single column that we have. As I'm changing these properties, we're going to go ahead and hit save so you can see the changes on the right hand side. So I want this first header to be employee ID, like so. And now the header is what's displayed in the header, and then the field is actually the data field that's coming from our data set. So in this case, it's going to be employee ID, like so. And I could just do this real quickly for the rest of the columns. Now that I have everything set up with a little bit of help from accelerating the video so you didn't have to see me type all that, let's go ahead and continue to add properties on the columns so you can see how the grid responds. One thing that you need to think about is based on the data type, we're going to add a filter for each column. So it's important that the data type is correct. By default, it's going to be string/text, but something like the age column, we want to make sure that the data type is set to a number. And for something like the date, I want to make sure that the data type is set to a date, like so. So now when I add my filter, it's going to have the correct options. Now the way that we set the filter is actually up at the grid level. So if I go back up to the IGX grid, and let me add a couple lines here, I'm going to tell the grid that I want it to allow filtering. And once I say equals true, we have another property called filter mode. And so there's a few filter modes for the grid. We have a standard mode. We have an Excel style filter mode. I'm going to tell this one to do the Excel style filter. And when I save this, what you'll notice is that on the grid, we have these kebabs. And when I click a kebab, I get this nice drop down, which gives me a bunch of options. I can do column pinning, column hiding. I can do some advanced filtering items. And you'll notice that these advanced items are very specific to the column type. So in this case, they are specific to a date. If I go off of this guy and do it on my true false, they're not going to say the options for the date. They're going to be for the Boolean, the string, etc. So you have some really nice capabilities here that will allow you to do the correct filtering and present them to your users in the right way. Now that we're at the grid level, let me do a couple other things so you can see how the grid responds. I'm going to tell it that I want multiple row selection, and all of this should come up in your IntelliSense. So I'm going to say multiple here, and for cell selection, I'm going to say multiple, multiple, like so. And I want to do column selection, and column selection will be the same thing, multiple. So this means as I'm interacting with the grid, I'm going to get multiple column selection on the cells, the rows, and the columns. The other thing you'll notice that the default experience of the grid is a material UI. So there's a bunch of space between the rows. What I want to do is set this display density property. So if I go to display density, we have 3 modes. This is the default mode. I'm going to change this to cozy and hit save. And you're going to see that the grid changed a little bit. There's more rows showing. And I can also now change this to compact. Compact, and hit save. And you'll see that even more rows are showing now. So the grid incrementally just kind of tightened up that display density. I like display density equals compact. That's what you're going to use for most line of business grids that you're building out for your customers. And I think that's all we're going to set here on the grid itself. So just a few properties that give us a few capabilities. Now let's go down to the grid column. So I want to go to my last name column here. And this is where you really start adding some of those interesting capabilities that your users will really end up appreciating. So things like In our Excel style filter, we have pinning. Do you want to disable pinning? Do you want it to be sortable? Do you want it to be movable? Well, actually, movable we can set up at the grid level. Do I want it to be editable, filterable, searchable, selectable, all these things? So I'm just going to set a few here. Has summary equals true. Let's go ahead and just so you can see how this reacts to disabling something. And in fact, because these are properties that are being evaluated, we need to make sure that they're inside of the brackets, like so. I'm going to say sortable equals true. So sortable, we want this to be sortable, equals true. And this is the last name column that we're working on here. Let's go ahead and say we want this guy to be editable. So let's say editable equals true. And as I am doing my IntelliSense, you can see all of the things that you have available to you. So for example, do I want this to be draggable? True or false? Do I want to disable pinning? So disable pinning, let's say true. So we want to enable that essentially. Do I want this to be searchable? You can do full text searches on the grid, and you can exclude columns from that as well. Do I want this to be resizable? Let's say true on that. And then what I want to do is I want to go back up to my grid level, and let's add one property here for moving. So I want to say moving. I want this to equal true as well. And let's put this guy like so. And now I will have the ability to move columns back and forth in the grid. So let's go ahead and save this and look at some of the results here. So I said I wanted multiple row selection. So you can see here my checkboxes showed up like so. If I have a select all, or the select all automatically shows up, so I can get this. We were on the last name column. We had sortable equals true. If I go to the other columns, I didn't enable sortable, so you can see here that they're just doing the column select. If I'm holding my control key down, it's doing multi-column select. If I go to my kebab, you'll see that my text filter option comes up, starts with does not contain equals, etc. Or I can just do selections like so, and the grid will automatically filter. You know that something happened on this particular column because the kebab turned a different color. I want to go to select all again. Let's go back to our date column, and you can see here for my date filters, I want all of the dates before. Let's do before, and I want to go to all of my data is from 2016. So I want to do before, let's say, February 1st, 2016. And now you can see that the grid changed, and I have 30 items in my count for last names in my footer because I said I wanted this guy to have summaries enabled. So let's go back, and I am going to select all, click apply, and I have all of my data back. If I double click on this column, I can go ahead and edit. This is cool. Now if I double click on the first name column, nothing happens because I didn't say it was editable. So we can just go back to our, and let's do our moving as well. So here you can see that I can move items back and forth, and I'll do another cool feature which I love. Let's do country. I'm going to pin this to the left, and now my grid has column pinning. So if I move like this, you can see that the column stays to the left. So let's just go ahead, and I'm going to copy this for each particular column. And then every column will behave the same. We'll save. The grid refreshes. Now if we go full screen, it's at 100% width. You can see that every column now has the same Excel style filter options. I can move any column that I want. I can do sorting like so. And actually there's one other feature that's really cool that I want to go ahead and add. Let's move this over to the left again. And I'm going to do this on the, let's say, the country column. And I'm just going to type in G because I want groupable turned on. So you can set this Outlook group by for any column, and I think the country column is probably the best one. But you'll see now that I've got this group header, I can take this, put it up there. Now I have groups. So super slick, and I've got the correct column summaries, like on a numeric type, count, min, max, sum, average. On a registration, earliest and latest based on each group. I can collapse and expand all groups like so, select all, and I can get rid of those groups. And then finally, we have a toolbar feature. So with the toolbar, you can add some additional functionality to the grid. So let's go all the way back up to the grid. You'll see we've got the paginator here. And actually, I didn't realize it was there. I'm just going to get rid of that paginator because I don't really want it. And if I save it, you'll see that it goes away. And I've got all my data in the grid like so. Now what I want to do is add my toolbar. So what you do is you just add the IGX-grid-toolbar like so. So now that I've got the toolbar, I can add items to the toolbar. And if I just hit save, you'll see that there's a empty toolbar up here. What I want to do is add a couple options like pinning, hiding, and exporting to this guy. So I'm going to first add my IGX grid toolbar actions. So what we do is get our toolbar dash actions like so. And within those actions is where I can add the default buttons that we're going to display. So first thing I'm going to add is IGX-grid-toolbar-pinning like so. And what I'm going to do is just copy this a few times. And I'm going to swap out my second pinning with hiding. And this is all so your users just have more capability with the grid. More interaction, more end user experience. And let's say finally exporter like so. And now I'm done here. We'll save this out. And you can see now with the grid, I've got my toolbar with different options. So these drop downs just make it easier for users to select items if they don't want to do it at the column header level. So we've got just some options here that actually end up pretty nice. Now, if I go to export, this is really slick. I'm going to click export to Excel, and this will automatically give me an Excel file. So it exported. I'm going to click open Excel data. Let's move this guy over here, and you can see that there is my Excel file. Even cooler, let me close this guy out. Let's go back and do our group by country like we had earlier. So now I've got a grouping. Let's export this to Excel again. And the difference now is that I have a real exported hierarchical grid exactly in the groupings that I had. So whatever you see in the grid is what's going to get exported. So that's it. With a few minutes and a little bit of guidance with the docs, you can use the Angular schematics with Ignite UI for Angular to create a full-featured grid. And really, the only code we had to write was around date formatting. Everything else was just property settings on the grid, and you end up something that has pretty much every feature every application needs for a grid. In the next video, you're going to see how to replace the local data with real data coming in from a web API. To learn more about modern web products like Ignite UI for Angular, check out igniteui.com. Also, click subscribe so you can get notified when we post new videos on how to use all of our modern web products.